Welcome, everybody, on this Thursday afternoon. I think for most people, if you're on East Coast time, I'm your host today, Chris Fanning. I'm the head of sales here at Amplix. And I wanted to just take a moment to kind of give you a high-level overview of the webinar. The webinar is titled kind of really how to navigate VMware's massive licensing shift and really how do you strategically prepare for what's next. So I'm going to introduce our panelists in a second, but as you all know, with the sale of VMware to Broadcom, there came some massive shifts in their go-to-market strategy, which really focused and centered around moving away from their long-standing perpetual licensing model that we're all really accustomed to more of a subscription-based model. The other part of the massive or swift changes that they made was reducing their overall partner program, which really put a strain on a lot of their managed IT and service providers who are servicing out there a massive amount of clients. So as you can imagine, over the last year, there have been a lot of panic and worry and concern. And I think now that the dust has settled over the last year, IT practitioners, IT and cloud service providers that you'll hear from today, and technology trusted advisors like Amplix are continuing to plan, strategize, and execute on the way forward when it comes to working with, within the new licensing model and how to go into a different direction. So during this discussion with our expert panelists, who collectively have around 100 years of infrastructure and cloud expertise, we'll give you some insight and knowledge into best practices and ideas around how to build a framework around your future state and what are the decisions that are going to be best for your organization and your business. So I'm going to take a second and give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. So starting with the first square that I see, I'm going to introduce John and let him introduce himself, and we'll go down the line.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Pam. Thank you so much for having me. My name is John Fiddler. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering at TierPoint. My team supports sales from New England through Baltimore and Washington. At TierPoint, we help businesses tackle their biggest challenges. So it's whether it's driving efficiency, strengthening security, or staying resilient in the face of disruption like this topic we're going to talk about today. We believe we have a great blend of technical expertise and enterprise-grade infrastructure that can really meet whatever your offering is. And I really we try to meet those business outcomes and not necessarily look at the tech. So it's a pleasure to be here and look forward to talking with everybody.
Great, thanks. Musha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Musa Madaria. I'm responsible for our global solutions architects and our channel teams at 1111. 1111 is really focused on being the cyber resilient platform. What that means is from production to disaster recovery, backup, and providing immutability and the ability to continue operations rather than just get back up and running or recover your data, but actually get back to productivity and servicing customers for companies. That's where our focus resides.
Great, thanks. Robbie, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm 117 years old, so I myself have 100 years of experience.
You're looking great.
Thank you. Again, thank you for having us on the webinar. My name is Robbie Guillory. I'm with a company called RapidScale. I'm the field CTO. We like to say to our constituents, our partners, and our customers that we help simplify IT and unleash innovation. What that means is if we can free up customers' time and energy from these kind of minutia issues around VMware, as an example, Broadcom, imagine what they can do with that time. They can actually think about IT in a much more strategic and elevated way. And so very excited to be on the webinar with you guys today.
Great. Thanks, Robbie. AJ.
Hi, my name is AJ Koftik. I'm field CTO at Expedient. We are a full stack cloud service provider with data centers across the country, covering everything from edge infrastructure to managed cloud to managed hyperscale cloud, DR backup, and everything in between. A lot of what we do is to try and help people get out of their own way. A lot of people are choosing complexity, not necessarily on purpose, but they are actively accepting it. And we want to help simplify all of that down and get people focused on the things that matter. So that's really where we focus all of our services and capabilities.
Great. Thanks, AJ. And last but certainly not least, and rounding out the panel discussion is Amplex's own Dan Frasco. Dan, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, just real quick. Thanks, Chris, for having me, and I'm really happy to be surrounded by all these really smart guys from all of our partners. Again, my name is Dan Frasco. I'm part of the solutions engineering and consulting team here at Amplix. I'm responsible for all things infrastructure, security, AI, you name it, cloud. That's kind of my gig here. Come from a background in the on the customer side, consumer side, actually spending about quarter of a century with Fidelity and some other financial services companies. So I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, Dan. So we're going to jump right into the questions here. So the first question I'm going to pose to our expert panelists are, with the recent changes by VMware on how the licensing model is going to be supported, what types of strategies have customers used in response over the past year, and forward looking, what do you think some of those plans are going to continue to evolve to be? So I'm going to start again with John and pick on him for a second. So John, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was poking around last night online and I found this quote. It's a Japanese proverb, but I think it kind of speaks to where we're at here. It says, if you get on the wrong train, it's best to get off at the nearest station and reassess your direction. The sooner you take action, the less costly it will be to correct your path. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today probably can be surmised in that. Whether it's actually the right direction or the wrong direction is almost unimportant. It's reassessing that direction, see where you need to go. I think what we've seen so far are going to be very similar to what the rest of the group has seen. For the most part, we have not seen a lot of people make change. I think that's the biggest thing. They probably aren't ready to deal with it yet. Most of this is a knee-jerk reaction, anger to the cost, the cost of VMware going up, and they've been sent off with tasks to go and find options for what they can do, but they're not necessarily aligned with their C-suite. They don't really have an idea how to do it, and in some cases, the people see their own jobs at jeopardy from making significant changes to it. So I think that's the majority of people that we've seen so far. They're still evaluating this. Reading an article this morning, I think they were estimating only 20% of the companies are going to migrate off VMware this year. So there's still a lot of people trying to make those moves. There are some, though, that have been able to get extensions or re-up their licensing and kick the can down the road a little bit. But I would say the majority of our people are still kind of in wait and see mode and haven't made any of those massive jumps to other platforms quite yet.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of, in talking with people, we see a lot of organizations that are, especially in early 2024, where they were like, I didn't have any time to try and figure out anything remotely considering a migration. I just have to bite the bullet and take whatever I'm given. I think the big thing that this allows organizations to do is look at what they're doing. One of the things that this has actually made big changes on, what I'm talking to clients, is they're finally going like, wait, there's other stuff out there, because they've just been so focused on the one tool that they've had for the last decade that they're like, oh, I didn't know that all this other stuff existed, and this is everything that's been going on around me because I didn't care. So we're having a lot of these bigger discussions, especially the organizations that did do that. I have to just get something on the board. This is an opportunity to actually start thinking about it and start putting together your plans of what you want to do. Because there's honestly, there's people who are deciding to move. There's plenty of people who are deciding to stay. Like, I like VMware as a platform. Let's continue using it. Yes, it's more expensive now. We were kind of, underpaying over the last few years because we were only paying for those support contracts. Yeah, the rooster's finally coming home, but is it worth it for us to make that move? Maybe, maybe not. And I could at least speak for us at Expedient, where the big one that we've seen being a driver is remote branch office, because of the core licensing changes and the number of cores you have to buy, and a lot of organizations having to pay for more cores just to maintain license compliance, not because they have more cores at those locations. And disaster recovery, where it's an environment that they had, and now they have to pay for all of that licensing day in and day out. And that becomes very expensive for something you hope to never use. And that's why we, as a DR, as a service provider, we can help align those costs with Edge. We can also help align those costs to try and get things into a better place. But I think there's a an overall sort of like the knee-jerk reaction is, okay, what do we do now? But I think it's interesting that most people are kind of learning what they could do for the first time.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing, AJ and John. We're seeing the same thing at 1111. And I would say that the two items that are driving customers back isn't only time. It's in addition to time, it's realizing the risk. And they just don't have the appetite for the risk. If they're taking their production environment and changing platforms, there's obviously a risk associated with it. And then once they get past the emotional response, they start contemplating, well, do I trade one devil for another? Because if they're moving to another platform that locks them into that platform, not only the virtualization layer, but also even the hardware layer, what have they really overcome? They're not allowing themselves better mobility. So they're deciding to trudge forward. I think that the one piece of advice we'd all offer them is don't wait until 3 months before your renewal is up for you to make plans. Start today. Otherwise, you're just going to continually kick it down the road.
So you just hit on something very, very key, right? Which is what a lot of people face, which is I don't have time to make that decision. I have an environment that's 2,000 nodes. I can't make that decision today, right? And they're getting hit with a bill. Or you have other people that are like, I'm such a small environment, I'll pay the bill. Right. So you have people that are on two different ends of the spectrum a lot of times. This is a strategic decision. This is not a make the decision and just stick with it for the next 5 years. Right. You have people that have been on this stuff for the last 10 years or more. Right. So you don't just pick up the stuff and move it to Hyper-V or move it to wherever and just be like, oh, hey, there we go. Right. So this is something that takes a lot more thought power. And, they're not just going to, you can't just make the decision overnight to move, such a large infrastructure. And they changed the pricing model so drastically where people had made large infrastructure investments a year before, and now their pricing just went up. You pick the number, 10-fold, 6-fold, I mean, whatever number you want, right? And that just has such a major impact. I mean, this is again another one of those conversations where you say, hey, listen, this has to be a business decision. Right, it can't be that gut and sort of that emotional reaction. You just mentioned that a second ago, right? What are we deciding on, and how are we deciding on?
So, let me pose kind of another question, or just kind of layer on top of something you just said, Dan, because you said like people can't just swivel chair into something new automatically and make that sweeping change. But what are some of the risks of inaction or delaying that inevitable to either adopt and kind of evolve into the new model, or shift into kind of a new direction? And then also, panelists, like weaving into your answers here, if you could highlight some of the opportunities or benefits that folks might see or realize in shifting to another model outside of VMware, I think that would be helpful for the audience.
I think, Chris, first of all, I'm so excited to see so many attendees on this webinar, right? I think between AJ, myself, John, Musa, I think we've been on panels ourselves, the four of us, probably 4 or 5 times I can remember. And we started this journey and these conversations back in almost a year now. So the fact that there's still this massive amount of interest around this topic, even in 2025, shows you a couple of things, that companies and organizations are finally starting to think about what the implications are. And I think there's a number of folks, I'm making some assumptions that some of these folks may not have some of the background. So I wanted to just first say, we've talked a lot about changing and pricing and whatnot, just at a high level. What we're talking about is a transition to subscription-based licensing versus, the old days of VMware, perpetual consumer consumption-based. So we're really going to this subscription thing, which may not be helpful for a lot of organizations from a pricing perspective. We're also going from 160-ish SKUs under the VMware world to 10. So we're streamlining, again, good and bad. And what we're also seeing in a lot of situations is, increases in licensing because of this subscription-based sort of world. So I just wanted to level set everybody in the in the attendee list to make sure they understand kind of what issues we're facing. Back to your question, Chris, in terms of the risks of not doing anything, and the risks of maybe looking at another platform, another virtualization platform, or a public cloud environment. It's it's kind of has been done as usual for a long time in a lot of organizations. We see this all the time. Hey, I've been running this, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mindset. And now I'm almost forced to make this change. At least I'm perceived forced to make this change. My risks are, well, how do I refactor these applications? How do I leverage microservices potentially in these public cloud environments that I wasn't leveraging before? How is this going to impact my user community if I'm talking about applications that are, again, customer or user facing? So there's a lot of sort of potential risks, but it starts with, I think what AJ was saying is, let's just first do an assessment of where we're at today, what the potential impacts are. Let's do an inventory of that for us to be able to really, advise our clients around the journey.
Yeah, and something that I think it gets lost in this is clients aren't necessarily looking at, they're looking at what the virtualization or platform it should be at, as opposed to starting with the usage profile of the application itself, right? They're like, all right, I'm just going to move everything to AHV or KVM, or I'm just going to push everything to Azure or AWS. And we've learned over the past 10 years, that's just not the right strategy to make a singular decision, because our applications, our data center, our usage, our users are no longer have a single profile. Everything's so distributed, and users are coming in from everywhere, and it makes it much more complex. So they should really take during that assessment that Robbie was just talking about, really take a look at where are your applications. Do a BIA assessment. That's going to serve you multiple purposes. It's going to allow you to understand how applications impact your business, and that'll help you plan for where the production environment should reside for that application, but just as importantly, how to protect it, what levels of protection you need to provide. So it serves multiple purposes. The risks are just as Robbie said. I mean, the risk of inaction, you're going to get left behind. We're in a world of evolve or die. And this is a really great opportunity for businesses to evolve how they're servicing their users and clients. And they should view this as a catalyst to really push forward on that and get the buy-in from the business. There's a real opportunity here.
I would say that we're seeing this being used as a lever, where previously it was like, okay, well, it's not broke, let's not fix anything. We don't need to do anything. The cost of doing it on VMware is reasonably inexpensive for us. Like, we don't need to change anything. It's worked for the last 10 years. Why would it not continue working? And this is where the stagnation comes in. This is where the technical debt starts to build up. And when you start to have those conversations with a CIO, a CFO, their whole thing is like, the business has to keep running. I don't care about anything else right now. But if you have a more strategic look at it and say, okay, well, now the cost of us doing this is not as low as it was before. It is now more expensive. And I would even argue, Dan, that the smaller organizations take this on the chin a lot harder, just from a percentage standpoint, right? They're not buying the full cloud. They weren't buying the full cloud foundation suite before, and now they're being nudged into doing so. And so that is where a lot of that, cost is also being added in. Do you want to take advantage of what VMware is doing? I do think they did their release a little bit backwards in terms of they rolled out all the new pricing at the end of 2023 into January 2024. And then everybody said, hey, what am I getting out of this? Oh, well, you're getting this new licensing model. I don't care about that part. What is the value? Why am I paying more? And then they came out at Explore and said, here's what we're doing with Cloud Foundation. We're bringing it all together, building an actual platform effectively as a service. There is a value proposition in there, but it'll also take you time to get there. I think the big lever that we're seeing is a lot of organizations really taking that second and third look and going through these applications and saying, okay, hey, this stuff we wanted to move all the way out to Azure. All of these applications, don't move everything. Nothing about your applications, if they didn't fit in Azure before, they don't fit now. Just because the price went up on what you were running it on doesn't change the fact that your apps don't fit there, right? But being able to pull those handful of applications, building out a proper strategy and using this as that catalyst to actually get things across the line and have that extra convincing financial factor, which is usually where people go, okay, well, this is actually going to save us in the long run, or this is going to be a more effective use of our spend than just continuing to kick the can down the road. And I keep coming back to that. Even if you renewed last year, you only have 2 more years left, probably, right? This doesn't happen in 3 months. Start having the conversations now about planning. You can talk to us at Expedient, to your point, 1111, Rapid Scale. We all have the ability to help you navigate that structure, and help put those workloads where they need to be. And Moose is absolutely right. DR comes into play here. This is something we come back to, is like, people are like, oh yeah, we're going to switch platforms. How do you do DR there?
DR is always
And then you-
DR is always the last child, right? DR, or whether it be that or resiliency, or however you want to look at it. And I'm really glad that you mentioned some of the, you keep going back to CFO's cost business analysis, because that's what we were just talking about a second ago, right? Is making that business decision about what you want to do. And what Musa was saying before is what I'm hearing too is make the decision on the application basis. Make the decision based on your business partners, make the decision based on those things. Should you go to a PaaS service? Should you be still looking at infrastructure? Should you be looking at embedded services within your hyperscaler? Where should you be putting your application? Should it be an edge service? What are you doing with it? And why are you doing it? How are you building your resiliency model? Are you using a built-in resiliency component within one of these things? Or are you building yourself? I mean, what are you doing, and what are the cost implications, and how are you building in those replication models?
I would even say, to kind of to Moose's point about like that moving to another hypervisor potential as a hardware lock-in. The other side of that is moving into a hyperscaler and utilizing the platforms as a service also has a lock-in factor.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Right.
It's
So
using the platform as a
is
service.
that worth is it worth it? By the way, just for everybody, lock-in's not real. It's
Yeah.
fake. It's made up. It's really just the measure of how much of a pain in the butt is it going to be to move to something else. That's it. Right.
It's this right here. Exactly. It's this that we're dealing with right now. How much of a pain in the butt is it to take the analysis and decide where do you want to go put it? And where
Yeah.
do you want
Everything is possible with the right amount of money and effort.
Mhm.
Yeah,
If-
so
if-
let's unpack some of, sorry, John, but let's unpack some of the, alternative strategies to VMware. If you're going to go down that path, and, let's unpack some of the potential pitfalls and shortcomings of maybe that strategy, or some of the benefits too. So let's, and John, I know you're going to jump in, so you can.
No, I was just gonna say that to everybody's point, there's studies that have been coming out that say that the length of time it takes to make these determinations and execute the plan could be up to 4 years, taking a heavy number of people to actually go ahead and make those decisions. I get worried when I hear the what I'll call the doers come to us and they're looking for options, but they don't have a plan that aligns with their business strategies because they haven't had conversations with their C-suite, and the only thing their C-suite knows is that they're paying more money. And when you put all those things together, I mean, the optimal solution is exactly what AJ and Musa and Dan and Robbie have talked about, is really to look at this as an opportunity and look at it as a way to evaluate each of the workloads you put in place. But the one thing that wasn't brought up is, and I'm not trying to be anti-VMware in any of these things. What I am going to say is that we don't know where Broadcom is going next with this. And the risk that is being run with where Broadcom could take this might be something that overrides any of these things and forces you to move. That said, it creates a lot of opportunities to move, to modernize, to do things you may not have wanted to do previously. But I think that should be a lever that's looked at. Do you want to get in a situation where either they continue to up your pricing? Things change when your
Are you
contract.
reading your history books, John? Are you,
Oh, no,
are you
no,
reading your
absolutely.
Broadcom history books?
Well, I know what goes on. So I'm just saying, I think that those are some things to look at too, is you want to put the workload in the right place, but just keep this in the back of your mind that that may be something that comes back to bite you if you don't at least address it earlier rather than later. Sorry, Chris.
I completely agree with you, John.
I think Dan, it was you who made that comment about business evolution. These days, I know this webinar is not about AI at all. However, we all are living in this world. Well, every business, every customer, everybody wants to talk about AI, and you combine that sort of shift to be more data driven, along with this disruption. There's a perfect sort of storm here, and that's the opportunity. So if you're looking at applications or frameworks or platforms that are different than what you've been doing, in conjunction to this, you're looking at, hey, how do I become more data driven in my journey as well? And so one of the options, and I know a lot of us are either Pinnacle or Premier partners of Broadcom, which is, hey, there are partners like us out there that can manage workloads on behalf of customers, fully managed. So that's one option. It's still VMware. It protects customers from some of these price hikes that direct relationships sometimes bring about. So that's one option. The other option is you may want to look at native public cloud environments. Now, that's not utopia like immediately, but there's some sort of, again, inventory of the applications, the users, the locations, all of that feeds into how you're going to potentially make that jump into those alternative environments.
I think one of the fun parts of this is that any of these migrations to any of the alternatives becomes a project for you, and the business will not want to put their projects on hold, especially as Robbie mentioned, AI. That's not being driven by the technology side of the house. That's being driven by the CEOs and the boards, right? That's being pushed in. That's not coming off. And you don't get to stop maintaining the platforms and the operational side of it because you have to keep things up and running and make sure this stuff doesn't go down and you don't have security breaches. So this becomes a project that eats the rest of your project time, potentially as an IT organization. So that's another piece to angle in on this of like, okay, where does this fit into my overall project strategy vision of where I see this going? If you are a CIO, a director, this at least the conversation needs to be had of, do we want to do this? What does this impact? Maybe you do kick the can again in 3 years, but over the next 3 years, you are putting yourself into a position to make that move. Or you are saying, hey, the rest of the stuff that is currently on our docket for the next 1.5 to 2 years, we're going to push that out in order to put this one in. This is all the like business machinations that John, you were talking about earlier, the doers don't get. Right? You get above a certain layer and like it's now business project. And even though the technology is screaming like, we need to get rid of this, we need to change this, we need to do something about this, the business doesn't necessarily care. And I've been in that seat and had to say, hey, like let's pump the brakes here. And they go, no, we have to do this other project. So I think that's something to consider as part of this. And when it's kind of coming back to Chris's original question around the alternatives, there's effectively two. There's going to an alternate hypervisor and staying in an on-prem environment, or utilizing a cloud provider to make that migration as well, or migrating to a hyperscale cloud, or a mix of all three, VMware alternate hypervisor and hyperscale.
There you go.
Possible, but you're adding you're adding in a lot of complexity. Remember,
but that migration time, as you know, can take time, and
it can take time.
You'll be in a hybrid environment for some period of time.
What have you guys seen so far in terms of that? I mean, what I've seen so far is people aren't looking at this as a project. They want to be able to really quickly brush through this, get me something that's easy for me to lift, and they're not looking at it that way. And I will make the case based upon the comment I made earlier that there is a train coming in this direction. It might not be coming rapidly, it might not be coming slowly, but it's something that's going to make them do this. What have you guys seen in terms of trying to get them to understand the depth of that? It doesn't. So we haven't had a lot of success in that at this point in time, trying to get to see the depth of what this is going to take to be able to actually make those moves.
I'm going to tell you right off the bat, just from a perspective, and I'm going to let you answer from your perspective, right? So just from having come from such a large organization, there is no choice but to take it in pieces and chunks, right? Because there's no way to basically lift and shift a 20,000 server environment in one day. Right, that just doesn't happen, right? So depending on the size of the organization, depending by the complexity, depending by the interconnections, interconnectivity, number of data center, whatever, you pick what you want to pick. You pick the lever, and then I want to get back to the AI conversation we're just having a second ago. But about Amy, please address.
Go ahead, Musa. Sorry,
I was just going to say it varies depending on the size of it, but the analysis in and of itself to properly do the analysis, you're looking at 90 to 180 days. And that's before things start moving. And people that do want to rush into it, we talk about the repatriation that's occurring. It's not because the hyperscalers suck.
No.
Last time I checked, they were all posting record profits and growth, right? So people aren't just pulling things out of the hyperscalers. What they're doing is learning their lessons, what shouldn't have gone. Before it was, I want to move everything. And of course, the
Wasn't I
hyperscalers,
want to, hold on, wasn't I want to, it was go do it.
I was
Go do it.
told, I was
Right.
told to. Right.
I was told to
told-
because the
told.
latest issue of CIO magazine came
Yep.
out and it said, if you don't go to the cloud, your company's going to die.
but
It's
That's
all
what
told.
happened.
But they also, as an organization, especially the publicly traded ones, needed to be able to make a public statement that they're a cloud first, right?
Yeah.
So everything I need is going to go cloud. And
Yeah.
now we all learn, as an industry, we've collectively learned our lessons
Yeah.
between what could and what should.
Yeah, cost, performance, you name them. Go
Yeah,
name
there's-
it.
Well, so do you
It's-
think we have learned the lesson though? I mean, aren't we really back at the same point right now where this is a lesson we should have learned previously and it's being thrown in front of us again, and are we going to make the same mistake?
Somebody joked about your history books. I mean, look at human history. We've
You-
never truly learned any lesson, right?
I mean,
Repeating
honestly,
things.
are you talking about cloud or are you talking about AI? I got lost there for a second because it's
Which
the
one?
same thing.
All of the above.
Take your pick, buddy. Because so the thing that I was gonna mention about the AI thing is you're talking about like combining the strategy, AI, whatever else. I'm like, let's get back to the business decision. What are we trying to solve?
Yeah.
Yeah,
trying to
and a lot of times they want to put, we are a cloud first company, we are an AI company, and they
What's
want to
your
put that
business
on there,
problem, man? So don't try to horseshoe the damn thing in.
but they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And this is how you end up with people who are doing this. Musa said the repatriation, the lessons were learned. You know, the fact that you have to type in like multiple security codes to open an S3 bucket to the public should tell you a lot about how many people opened S3 buckets to the public and ended up in the news. But I think the big thing is when we're having these conversations and trying to look at the various alternatives of where to go to, it comes down to sometimes it's a feeling. We've definitely heard directly from customers, I don't want to pay Broadcom or VMware another cent, full stop. And it's in that like, we're going to the cloud, hell or high water type of thing. And sometimes we have to back them off of that a little bit and go like, maybe that's not such a great idea for you. But also we have the conversation of, okay, if that's what you want to do, what are you willing to invest in? Are you willing to invest your time into learning whatever that new platform is? Are you willing to invest your time into what does your DR strategy look like now? What does your backup strategy look like now? How are you monitoring? How are you securing? All those things kind of come back into play because you haven't been doing it for 10 years. It's a new platform to you. And so how do you encompass that? That's where we as service providers, especially Expedient, we come in and help along with building the solutions around that so that we're solving the problem so they don't have to go try to do all the research and learn all the lessons for themselves. We've already done we've done the education and can help just kind of provide the right solution to get them where they need to be. But I think the biggest piece comes back to, like, John, you keep mentioning it, like the train's coming down the path. Are you getting out of the way or not? And if you would like to get, are you getting on the train or are you getting out of the way?
And I'm so happy someone mentioned how many people are on here and how we're going to distribute this stuff. I'm so happy to see people inquiring and looking and listening, asking questions and stuff. So we don't run into these pitfalls. It was the same thing with AI when we had our event up in Vermont. Let's avoid the pitfalls, right? Let's ask the questions. Let's get ahead of the curve and all that kind of stuff. So I'm happy to see so many of at least our customers and clients asking those questions. I'm sure you guys are having them to get away from that sort of that pattern.
So what I'd like to do now is, for the audience, for the folks that, again, I agree. It's great to see that people are still interested in this topic and need guidance and assistance. So to that end, I'd like to go around the horn and have you guys each give an example of kind of real life scenarios that are going on, in the industry, what you're seeing as service providers, give us a client journey on, either working within the VMware ecosystem or moving to one of those, alternative strategies that we've discussed and someone that maybe has done it well. So John, why don't I start with you to kind of kick us off there?
Sure. I think having built trust with certain customers is really key in this. I think the more trust we build with customers, the more likely they are to want to take that journey with us when it's something they're not comfortable with. We didn't talk yet about the TCO pieces of it. I think where the TCO gets lost in that is the whole concept of the soft cost, the cost of people to do this, the time, all those types of things that aren't covered. People just want to look at the licensing costs and the direct cost of that. We did have a law firm that was a long time private cloud customer with us, and our private cloud is run on VMware. They did have and had built a great relationship with our sales and support teams, which had that trust then inherently there. And they did already have a small Azure footprint already in place. The C-suite did have a vision of getting to public cloud fully, but hadn't enacted on that and didn't know how to get there. I think the fact that there was an alignment between the C-suite and the champion by the CFO was clearly, and he was clearly involved in this because of the price increase. They just didn't know how to get there. They needed assistance in getting that transition done. So to everybody's point here, we discussed evaluating workloads, building this on a well-architected framework, and they did not know how to do that, but it resonated as the direction that they wanted to take. So it really was, in my taste, a perfect storm. It was a customer that we already had that was happy with the services they were getting from us, understood what the impact was to them, had buy-in from their C-suite had a strategy from their C-suite through their doers about how to get there, and wanted to take that step. And so I think that just worked out really well. But for every story like that, there are probably 5 other stories or 10 other stories that there's a disconnect somewhere along there that doesn't lead to the successful outcome that we had with that particular company.
John, you couldn't have said it better. I'll give an example of a fairly recent win for us, but you're right. For every one of these wins, there's a lot of confusion and misconception. So a large defense contractor in the DC area called us, said, "Hey, Robbie, can you educate me on VMware? I heard you on a webinar." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Let's have a conversation." So we had a conversation, and I said, "Well, the option." I say this all the time. AJ knows my shtick. Hey, the option to do nothing is an option. And he's like, "Yeah, a lot of F words." He goes, "I'm not paying those guys another effing cent." So the emotional side definitely was there. Inevitably, what that led to, well, first we did a migration of a handful of DAS environments into AVD, because that's the other thing we often don't talk about with VMware and Broadcom is there was this thing called Horizon DAS over there in the corner that got sold off to KKR. And I know we didn't cover that here either. And that's exactly what we did with these guys. They said, "We've got these Horizon DAS users, about 1,200 or so. I need to basically move those." So we ended up first, kind of mapping out a path to AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop. And then when we start getting into the refactoring and modernizing some of these workloads and applications, inevitably for these particular individuals at this company, Google was the place for them. They do a lot of work in government, federal and state, local government. So for them, it was the Google platform. And again, we're here as agnostic. I like to call myself Yoda. And here to just kind of guide and just work with them to map them, kind of to that environment. So for us, the win was not only the AVD, getting them into some kind of other DAS environment, desktop as a service environment, but also the path. And it's not a one and done thing. We're still working on this project, and it's a small incremental step at a time function to basically get these workloads shifted into some, more hyperscaler oriented environment.
Got it. That's a great example. Thank you. And the Yoda comparison is uncanny. I mean, it's just I can see it. AJ, how about you go next?
I mean, we've had a number of clients who have come to us for migrations. We are a Nutanix private cloud provider, so we are able to do Nutanix as a service. One of the big things that allows clients to do is make the migration from VMware into a Nutanix environment, but eliminate the CapEx that goes along with that, especially if you're in a 3-tier environment. So we're able to provide it just as a service to them, where we manage everything. We procure the hardware, connect it, put it all together, give them a cluster, and then help them migrate on. In the process, we are doing a number of these migrations. In fact, one that we've had going since August, where we are migrating a customer Citrix environment that was running on top of VMware. And as part of that migration, we've had people who were going through migrating those hosts over, and they were on Nutanix with VMware on top. So we've also been flipping the hosts from ESXi to AHV. This has been a slow roll because they already had that cluster. So we're helping them just kind of switch in place. But this is the sort of thing where they needed help. They did not know how they were going to go do that. They wanted to save the money there because, Robbie, they were in the same boat. They lost a licensing option from VMware that they were using for VDI purposes, the vSphere for desktop licenses,
Yeah.
which again went away in the KKR deal. So that was something that was it wasn't even a, hey, your price is going up. It was like, that price does not exist. You have to figure out something else to do now. So we've been helping them over the last 4 months. We've also been providing them temporary VMware licensing to get them through. Their contract ended. We've been providing them with a temporary licensing as part of the migration, which is, again, something we as Expedient do from a service provider standpoint to help navigate that sort of gray space between I want to get off of, I have to be off of something, and when am I actually off? John has mentioned a few times now, like, don't wait until 3 months before. I've definitely had somebody go, oh yeah, our renewal's next year. Can you double check that for me? Oh, it's next month. Whoops. And you go, oh, you need to have a conversation with us or your various VAR of choice in order to get you some licensing, because you are in a bad way. You cannot make a migration in less than 30 days. So these are the things, like, honestly, the biggest piece of information right now to just start with is, what do you know your support renewal date? There's a lot of people who don't, even though they're managing these environments day in and day out. If you don't know that piece of information, you potentially can get caught off guard. There are ways to navigate this, and I think that's where we as the service provider space can help figure out where to go, but also provide options on how to get through it, not just from point A to point B, but like, what happens at that rest stop in the middle, or what happens when there's a bump in the road? How do we help get through that as well? So I think that's really where we've come in and helped there.
Great. And so AJ, in that example, it didn't sound like, to John's point, we really haven't unpacked the whole TCO kind of modeling on this. It didn't sound like there was a TCO analysis done on that one because it was like, had to move. It wasn't like, let's do the analysis, but, well, maybe there was, so you could go down that path. But in terms of the shift to Nutanix, our customers realizing an ROI from a TCO, like a total cost of ownership modeling, are they seeing a benefit there?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this is based on how we build our clusters, our relationship with Nutanix, and that's allowed us to provide Nutanix as a service cheaper than VMware almost every single time, which is honestly different than if you were to buy it on-prem. A lot of people who are going out and looking at Nutanix are discovering, like, wait, this isn't cheaper. I thought it was going to be cheaper. And that's for various reasons. We have been able to work this in our service where we can do it even against our own VMware service cheaper than what clients can do with VMware. So there are options there. The other thing is, we've had a lot of people who do make that, heard from clients who've made the move from VMware to AHV. And to Moose's point, they went, crap, we need DR. And that's where we come in, because we can do DR as a service as well. So these are the sorts of things where meeting the market where we saw it going, and we saw this being this like key alternative that people wanted to go to, and then building out our services around that. And it's been really successful for us.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks for that story and example. Musa, would you like to jump in and give us one of your case studies?
Yeah, I think this one's a really a great example of how important it is for IT to look at the business holistically and everything going on in the environment, as opposed to just simply the VMware challenges that they face. So we were engaged with a law firm that was getting audited by their clients for cyber resiliency, and they reached out to an insurance broker for cyber insurance. The broker said, "You've got so many gaps on the standardized checklist. You're almost uninsurable," and they would be losing clients if this was exposed. So they actually engaged us on a consulting engagement. They were referred to us by the broker that we happen to have a relationship with. We were doing the assessment and going through finding the gaps in their environment. We asked them about the VMware renewal. They were so focused on getting the proper checks and balances in place from a resilience perspective, so they don't lose parts of their business, that they were just going to do a renewal that was about 120 days out. So as opposed to doing the renewal, we talked to them about how all the gaps that they have currently from a cyber resilience perspective and insurability perspective would be filled by leveraging what we do from an IaaS perspective, because it's secure by design. And the fact that they were coming due for a renewal, everything just happened to line up so well. Their rates came down drastically from what they were initially quoted. We worked with them to pass audits from their clients. And it was a very low risk migration, right? Most of their case information is all housed in SaaS, in legal SaaS applications. So this was primarily back office billing, file share. It was their core shared services platforms. And moving from VMware to VMware for any of our platforms, right? We've been through it so many times. There's very minimal risk. It's much quicker than trying to move to a different platform because there's no conversion. So we were able to move it within the time frame, avoid the renewal, but most importantly, make sure that their business could continue to operate and meet the demands of their clients. So that's something that quite often is missing from this, just because of the time frame that all of us have touched on, right? It running around with your hair on fire, you're trying to keep everything up and running, and you're trying to address this challenge. Sometimes we just have to help people to take a step back and think about the other issues going on and how can we address them simultaneously.
Great. Dan, any thoughts on kind of the stories that were shared here by the team?
No, I think they're all pertinent. I mean, I think everybody's hearing a lot of the same kind of similar things. I mean, a lot of people are having to figure out what their migration path is going to look like, and how to get there. I mean, I think we've talked to, I've talked to different folks at Expedia a number of times and heard about the different paths they have. I think they have some very good strategic options there. RapidScale, to your point. So all these guys, we talked to the different paths that they have involved. I think there's a lot of good options out there for people to take. So I'm really glad to hear them having some real good stories to be able to tell.
Great. Yeah, so we're going to get to some questions real quick at the end, but just real quick going back around the horn, and Dan, I'll start with you. Just like, what should people be doing next if they've really heard something intriguing on this the webinar, which I'm sure they did, or if they were really starting to think like this, I got to make a move in that short term and make sure, as AJ mentioned, finding out those service dates and what would be an appropriate next step if somebody feels like they're behind the eight ball or ready to make a change. How do they start?
I'd start by digging a hole, put my head in it. No. So I think it's a pretty obvious answer that you hear from a guy who has a big thing that says Amplix behind him, right? I would obviously recommend reaching out. If you have a current Amplix rep, reach out to them, get something set up, and we can obviously pull in the right people and start having those conversations. If you don't have one, my friend, at least on my screen to the right here, Mr. Fanning, is willing to take that first call. His email address, if you don't have it, is cf@amplex.com, charliefrank@amplex.com. And he's also offered to take weekend phone calls, any sort of luncheons, barbecues, whatever you have. He's willing to have, no, okay, maybe not that.
Those two things were very different in terms of punishments. One of them was a weekend call. One of them was barbecue. That's
yeah.
But I know.
I'm good with either, so it works.
Seriously,
Chris is very welcoming. But if you don't want to go that route, you can also go to amplex.com. There's a contact us button. There's a web form there. There's another general email box if for some reason you don't want to talk to Chris. But there's also a 1-800 number there to call as well, which I didn't even know we had a 1-800 number. But whatever makes it easiest for you, reach out. And then there's always the other piece which comes in, which we've been talking about again, which is trying to start to think about what your business reasons are, right? Start to go through that process, right? And start to think of where you're at today, what are the business reasons and why you're starting to go there, but we'll obviously help you walk through that when we get on the phone with you.
Great. What are, AJ, what are some of the normal questions that people are asking in terms of that next step? Like if they're coming to you and saying, I'm ready to make a move, how are they starting the conversation and what are they asking you?
They're coming and saying, we need help. And that's it. Like, they're not coming to us with like a lot of them are not coming with a form strategy. They're like, we need help. We've heard you can help. And then we go from there.
So I guess my question would be, is there, in that scenario or in others, is there alignment between the C-suite and the IT team who might be coming to you? I'm assuming it's the IT team that's coming to you first, right? But is there alignment there? Are they on the same page?
Or is it the CFO, right? I mean, I'd be very interested to know
Yeah.
which one it is.
Well,
Good
the
point.
CFO has hollered at the IT director, CIO, and said,
He
"You
lit
got to
the
do something
fire,
about
you know,
this.
or he or she
I
lit
don't
the
know what
fire.
it is."
Yeah.
And sometimes it's coming back and saying, "This is what it would be if you stayed. This is what it would be if you moved to VMware as a service. This is what it would be if you moved to Nutanix as a service. This is what it would be if you wanted to go into a hyperscale environment," and walking through that. But honestly, our sales process and what we do with Amplix in the field is going through and trying to figure out what is the right thing that meets the needs of the business. Like I can provide 3-4 different ways of solving the VMware, this conundrum that people are hitting, but like I joke about like context in AI and how like if I ask this group of people, how do you size a client? I'm going to get 4 or 5 different answers. I'm going to get a whole lot of like, well, I mean, I guess if it's like a big, if I know it's a big environment, then I'm going to do this. If I know it's a small environment, I'm going to do this other thing. But if I said, "Hey, Dan, how did you size this one particular client?" You can tell me the exact story, right? It's the same thing when it comes to walking through this. It's a situation by situation basis. I have all the options. How do I put together the right meal, right? How do I put together the right solution for someone that is going to solve that problem and meet their needs? Like, honestly, sometimes we just sit down and go, "This is what you told us. This is what we think is best based on what you told us. Is that still true?" Because sometimes they forget what they told you. So a lot of times it's just explaining back their conundrums, their prerequisites, and getting them to confirm on what they meant. Communication's hard. So we try to help them walk through it.
John, is that kind of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, if I had to have takeaways from this, it would be have a mutually agreed upon business-based strategy. So get with that, get with your C-suite in advance. Make sure you're, you know, when if you're an IT guy, make sure that when they say, "Do you go look at options?" Understand the whys behind those things. To evaluate the workloads, you know, not holistically look at one place to put it, but evaluate based upon a workload. People want the easy button, and we understand that. But this is not necessarily going to be an easy thing. And to AJ's point, you know, when you deal with CSPs like us and ask for assistance, which I think you should do no matter if it's, to your point, a rapid scale 1111, you know, expedient, doesn't really matter. We know you're going to ask for options. We will provide those to you and show you which ones are optimal based upon the goals that you put in place and try to get you to where you need to get to. We're all very, very capable about doing that. But the other thing I don't think is taken into consideration enough is people need to understand how extensive a project this is. And we touched on that earlier. They have to be willing to put the time into this, understanding all the you know, the areas that they're struggling right now to make that happen. But I completely agree with what these guys have said beside that.
Musa, Robbie, anything to add there?
You know, no, these guys are, that's what I love hanging out with them. They're brilliant. I think the only thing I would really just remind folks is do an inventory, right? Like just, there are situations. In fact, another example of a customer or prospect where we didn't do anything. Because once we looked at the RV Tools report and did a bit of an analysis of their existing infrastructure, we learned that it was very modern hardware. It was just, everything was 16 cores. Everything had been updated fairly recently. And then we actually sat down and did a bit of a consulting arrangement. It turned out that, you know, they saw about a 15 or 16% increase. And so, you know, in that case, the decision was made by the customer, "Hey, at this stage, we're not going to do anything." So we've talked about that a couple of times, but the option to do nothing is still an option. And in some, like AJ said, case by case basis. In this particular case, that option made more sense than any other option. So again, you know, we're here to advise and coach folks on what the right path is.
Robbie, just to come on top, one of the things though you did say on this is the customer, you went through and actually assessed the situation with the customer.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing, right? If they ignore it, that's a different story rather than we assess it and no action was the right case for the customer. And I think all of us are willing to take that path where applicable.
And the one thing that none of us can stress enough, start early. That way you can make thoughtful, informed decisions as opposed to hurried decisions. So much of the do nothing isn't actually driven, like Robbie's example of it financially makes sense, but rather because of how big of a project it turns into, that they're paralyzed.
Yeah.
So earlier gives you the time to decide how you want to approach the project. You can do it in phases. It can be a modular approach. And it can be done very thoughtfully about what's right for the business as opposed to what you can hurry up and get done.
I learned how to dig a trench the other day because I wanted to reroute some water at the house, and I did that on YouTube. It was awesome. This is not a situation where you go to YouTube and try to figure this out. This is where this partner ecosystem really can help you guys as you're thinking about kind of future path.
It's funny because some of the things you guys are saying right now, I developed a training for a sales team probably about almost a year ago now. And some of the things that you guys are saying are basically like headlines of this thing. Should I stay or should I go? Right. Different scenarios, there's 4 different scenarios of how they can get there. Right. I mean, it's just all very, very similar to things that basically the first things you would ask a customer when you go in there and talk to them. So it's reassuring to hear those things.
Yeah, no, this is all great feedback. And so in closing, I will just say to the audience, I think the overarching theme is, yes, doing nothing could be potentially the right answer, but let's have a conversation. Let's game it out and figure out what is the best path for your organization and your business. And Amplix can be the tip of the spear with that. We can help bridge the gap between yourself and the C-suite, or vice versa. If it's the CFO that's looking to make a change because of that financial impact of the business, we can help model that out and bring in the right service providers to help get us there to that end state. And there are other ways that we can work and help customers from a cost and operational efficiencies perspective. So if you're going to stay with VMware, but your costs are going up, but that's the right solution for you, well, we can look at other parts of your business and help you drive other efficiencies to kind of offset that, if that is the best course of action for your organization. So it all starts with a conversation, and we are here to really be the quarterback of those conversations and really guide the journey for you, whether it be myself, Dan, others within the organization, and then this great group of panelists and service providers that we have here. So I challenge you to kind of raise your hand and let's start with a conversation. So I want to thank everyone for attending today, and to the panelists and Dan, really appreciate you guys taking the time and educating our customers and prospective customers. And thank you to Kylie, who's behind the scenes kind of managing this whole process and herding us all together. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and we look to talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Okay.